On a scorching August afternoon in 1997, in a working-class neighborhood just outside San Bernardino, California, a woman named Rosa Hernandez stopped by her sister's apartment for what should have been an ordinary visit. She knocked on the door of Unit 2B at the Riverside Gardens complex. No answer. She knocked again. Through the thin walls, she could hear the television playing inside. She tried the handle. Locked. Maria pulled out her spare key, the one her sister had given her months earlier, the one she'd never needed to use. When she pushed open that door, when she stepped across that threshold into the stale heat of that small apartment, she found her 23-year-old sister Rosa lying face down on the living room carpet in a pool of dried blood. Rosa's 4-year-old daughter Isabela was sitting on the couch, still in her pajamas, watching cartoons. The child turned to her aunt with eyes that seemed too old, too knowing, and said just 3 words that would echo through the years to come. What really happened in that apartment in the hours before Maria arrived? And why would it take nearly 2 decades for the full truth to finally surface? The Riverside Gardens apartment complex sat at the edge of San Bernardino County, where the city frayed into desert scrubland. Built in the 1970s, the 2-story buildings formed a horseshoe around a central courtyard with an empty swimming pool that hadn't held water in years. Chain-link fences separated small concrete patios. Air conditioning units hummed constantly against the desert heat. Most residents worked service jobs, retail shifts, warehouse positions at the distribution centers that dotted the inland empire. Rosa Hernandez had moved into Unit 2B 18 months earlier, in February 1996, after separating from her husband, Miguel Santos. Rosa worked the morning shift at a coffee shop on Baseline Avenue, leaving home at 5:30 each morning when the sky still held onto darkness. She'd drop Isabela at her mother's house in Colton, work until 2 in the afternoon, then pick up her daughter and return to the apartment. Neighbors knew this routine. They'd see Rosa's white 1989 Honda Civic pulling out before dawn. They'd hear Isabela playing in the courtyard most afternoons, her voice carrying through the complex as she pushed her toy shopping cart across the cracked concrete. Rosa kept to herself mostly, but she was polite when encountered at the mailboxes or in the laundry room. She had dark hair she wore pulled back in a ponytail, a quick smile for Isabela, and a careful way of watching the parking lot when she came home after dark. Miguel Santos, her estranged husband, lived across town in a studio apartment near the 215 freeway. He worked night security at a warehouse. He was 26 years old, compact and muscular from years of construction work before the security job. Those who knew him said he had a temper that could flash hot and fast, then cool just as quickly. Rosa had left him after an argument that had gotten physical, though she'd never filed a police report. She told her sister Maria that she was done, that she needed space, that maybe eventually they could work things out but not now. Miguel had agreed to the separation, but he visited often, sometimes appearing at the apartment unannounced. Rosa's neighbors had seen his burgundy Chevy pickup in the parking lot at odd hours. Clear's throat, the morning of August 12, 1997, arrived like every August morning in San Bernardino, the sun already heating the air by 6 o'clock. Rosa had Tuesdays off from the coffee shop. She told her mother the night before, during their usual evening phone call, that she planned to take Isabela to the park, maybe stop by the library. Just a quiet day, nothing special. Her mother, Carmen Hernandez, would later remember that Rosa had sounded tired but not worried. There'd been no tension in her voice, no hidden message in her words. Just a daughter talking about tomorrow's plans with her little girl. What happened in the hours that followed can only be pieced together from fragments, from what neighbors heard, from what they didn't hear, from the evidence left behind in that small apartment and the evidence that was conspicuously absent. At approximately 9:15 that morning, Mrs. Chen in Unit 2A heard voices through the wall. A man's voice and Rosa's voice. The voices were raised but not quite shouting. "Mrs. Chen was 72 and didn't speak much English, but she recognized the cadence of an argument. She heard a door slam, then silence. She went back to her morning television programs and thought nothing more of it. This was an apartment complex where walls were thin, and other people's business stayed other people's business. At approximately 10:30, a resident in Unit 1C, directly below Rosa's apartment, heard what he would later describe as a thump, like something heavy hitting the floor. He was watching television, getting ready for work at the warehouse. He turned down the volume, listened for a moment, heard nothing more. He turned the television back up. At approximately 11:15, another neighbor saw Miguel's burgundy pickup leaving the parking lot. She noticed because he was driving faster than usual, the truck's tires squealing slightly as he turned onto the street. She was carrying groceries from her car and had to step back to avoid being too close to his path. She caught a glimpse of his face through the windshield. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw set, his hands tight on the steering wheel. For the next 3 hours, until Rosa Hernandez arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon, nobody reported hearing anything from Unit 2B. The apartment sat silent in the August heat. Inside, Rosa lay on the carpet, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. A small caliber weapon, fired at close range. The blood had pooled and begun to dry in the warm air. Isabela sat on the couch, the television playing, her small form perfectly still. She had not cried out. She had not run to a neighbor. She had simply sat there in that apartment with her mother's body for hours. When Maria pushed open the door with her spare key, when she saw her sister on the floor, she screamed. She screamed and grabbed Isabela and ran from the apartment, the child in her arms, Maria's phone still in her purse. So she pounded on the door of Unit 2C where she knew an older couple lived. They called 911 at 2:33 in the afternoon. San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 8 minutes. Deputy Robert Walsh was first through the door. He saw Rosa Hernandez lying face down, her arms at her sides, one leg bent slightly. He saw the blood, dark and thick on the beige carpet. He saw the television playing quietly, a bright contrast to the scene before him. He checked for a pulse, knowing he would find none. The body was cool to the touch. She'd been dead for hours. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived at 3:10. She was 41 years old, a veteran of the department with 15 years in homicide. She walked through the apartment with the careful, methodical attention of someone who understood that crime scenes told stories if you knew how to read them. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. The apartment was neat except for the body and the blood. No signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. Rosa's purse sat on the kitchen counter, her wallet inside, cash and cards untouched. A coffee cup sat on the counter, still half full, the coffee long since cold. The television remote was on the couch next to where Isabela had been sitting. In the bedroom, the bed was made. In Isabela's small room, toys were arranged neatly on shelves. Everything suggested an ordinary morning interrupted by extraordinary violence. Detective Morrison noted in her report that the scene was inconsistent with a robbery or random attack. She noted that the victim appeared to have been shot without warning, the single wound to the back of the head suggesting she'd been standing or kneeling, facing away from the shooter. She noted that there was no weapon at the scene. She noted that the daughter had been in the apartment, unharmed, for an unknown length of time after the shooting. By 4 o'clock, the apartment complex was cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. News vans began arriving, their satellite dishes rising like strange flowers in the parking lot. Neighbors gathered in clusters, talking in low voices, arms crossed against the heat and the horror. Maria sat in the back of an ambulance with Isabela, the child silent and unmoving, her small hand clutching her aunt's shirt. Detective Morrison began conducting interviews immediately. She spoke with Mrs. Chen, who described the voices she'd heard that morning. She spoke with the neighbor who'd heard the thump. She spoke with the woman who'd seen the burgundy pickup leaving the parking lot. By 5 o'clock, Detective Morrison had a name at the top of her notepad, underlined twice. Miguel Santos. They brought Miguel in for questioning at 7:30 that evening. He'd been at his apartment when deputies knocked on his door. He opened it immediately, no hesitation, no surprise on his face. When they told him Rosa was dead, he sat down heavily on his couch and put his head in his hands. "No," he said. "No, no, no." His reaction seemed genuine to the deputies who were there. Raw grief, shock, the physical collapse of a man receiving devastating news. At the station, Miguel agreed to speak without a lawyer present. Detective Morrison sat across from him in the small interview room, the air conditioning humming, a tape recorder running between them. Miguel's hands shook as he answered questions. Yes, he'd been at Rosa's apartment that morning. They'd arranged for him to stop by around 9. He'd wanted to talk about reconciliation, about coming home, about being a family again. They'd talked. It had gotten heated. She told him she wasn't ready, that she needed more time. He'd gotten angry, raised his voice. Then he'd left. He'd left her alive. He'd driven to a friend's house on the west side and stayed there until afternoon. "What time did you leave the apartment?" Detective Morrison asked. "Around 9:45, maybe 10. Did you see Isabela? She was in her room playing. Rosa wanted her out of the room while we talked. Did you own a gun?" "No, I mean I did, a .22, but I sold it months ago, March or April, I think." "Who did you sell it to?" "Some guy, I don't remember his name. Answered an ad I put in the classifieds." "Do you have any proof of that sale?" Miguel shook his head. "It was cash. I didn't get a receipt or anything." Detective Morrison made notes, her pen scratching across paper. She asked Miguel if he would consent to a gunshot residue test. He agreed immediately, holding out his hands. The test came back negative, but Detective Morrison knew that meant little. He'd had hours to wash his hands, change his clothes. She asked if they could search his apartment and vehicle. He agreed to that too, signing the consent form without reading it. Deputies searched his studio apartment and found no weapon. They searched his pickup truck and found nothing connecting him to the crime. They interviewed the friend Miguel claimed to have visited that morning. The friend, Luis Cortez, confirmed that Miguel had arrived around 10:30 and stayed until after lunch. "He seemed off," Luis told deputies. "Quiet, you know, but not like guilty quiet, more like sad quiet." Over the next 3 days, Detective Morrison built a timeline. Miguel's story lined up with what neighbors had heard and seen. The voices at 9:15. The door slam, the pickup leaving at 11:15, but there was a gap. An hour and a half between when Miguel said he left and when the neighbor saw the pickup leaving the complex. Miguel insisted he'd gone directly to Luis's house, but the drive should have taken only 20 minutes. Where was that extra hour? When confronted with this discrepancy, Miguel seemed confused. "Maybe I got to Luis's later than I thought," he said. "I don't know, I was upset. I drove around for a while, maybe, just thinking. I honestly don't remember." The investigation expanded. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood for anyone who might have seen something, anyone who might have heard the gunshot. They found nothing. The complex was full of people heading to work, watching television, living their lives. A single gunshot from a small caliber weapon in the middle of the morning, muffled by walls and air conditioning units, could easily go unnoticed or be dismissed as something else. A car backfiring. Something dropped. The soundtrack of a television show. They examined Rosa's phone records. Miguel had called her the night before at 8:15. They'd talked for 7 minutes. He'd called again that morning at 8:42. 2-minute conversation. No other calls that morning. Her cell phone was found in her purse, the battery dead. Forensic evidence from the apartment was processed. The blood was Rosa's, type O positive. No other blood was found. No fingerprints that didn't belong to Rosa, Isabela, Maria, or Miguel. The bullet had passed through Rosa's skull and lodged in the floor beneath the carpet. It was a .22 caliber, consistent with the type of weapon Miguel admitted to once owning. But without the gun, they couldn't make a definitive match. The bullet was relatively intact, but showed no unique markings that would tie it to a specific weapon. Clear as throat. Detective Morrison knew she had a case built on circumstantial evidence and one glaring gap in Miguel's timeline. She knew that marriages ending in separation were high-risk situations, that domestic violence was the leading cause of death for women in Rosa's age group, that Miguel had a history of anger issues even if he'd never been arrested. She knew all of this, but knowing and proving are different things. She also knew that Isabela was the only witness, and Isabela hadn't spoken a word since her aunt found her. Child Protective Services placed Isabela with Maria temporarily. The department brought in a child psychologist, Dr. Patricia Hammond, to try to interview the girl. Dr. Hammond spent 3 sessions with Isabela over the course of a week. Isabela would sit in the office, surrounded by toys and soft furniture, and say nothing. She would draw pictures when asked: houses, flowers, a stick figure family. When Dr. Hammond gently asked about that morning, about what Isabela had seen, the child would simply stop drawing and stare at the paper. "She's traumatized," Dr. Hammond told Detective Morrison. "She witnessed something that her brain can't process. She may never speak about it, or she may speak about it when she's ready, but we can't force that." By the end of August, the investigation began to slow. The media coverage decreased. The community's attention moved on to other tragedies, other headlines. Miguel remained a person of interest but was never arrested. There wasn't enough evidence. The district attorney's office reviewed the case and declined to file charges. "Get me more," the DA told Detective Morrison. "Get me the gun, get me a witness, get me something concrete." Detective Morrison kept working. She tracked down the classifieds where Miguel claimed to have advertised the gun sale. She found an ad that matched his description from April 1997. .22 cal pistol for sale, $150. She called the phone number listed. It had been disconnected. She couldn't prove the ad was Miguel's, and she couldn't prove he'd actually sold the gun. He could have kept it. He could have used it. He could have disposed of it in the hours after the shooting. She obtained Miguel's cell phone records. His phone had pinged off a tower near the apartment complex at 9:43 that morning. The next ping was at 11:22 from a tower near Lewis's house. That gap, that missing hour and a half. Miguel insisted he'd driven around, maybe stopped for gas. He couldn't remember exactly. Detective Morrison checked gas stations in the area. No one remembered seeing Miguel. No receipts were found in his truck. By October, the case file sat on Detective Morrison's desk alongside others. Open but not active. Cold but not closed. Rosa Hernandez's murder joined the ranks of unsolved cases, the ones that keep detectives awake at night, the ones that feel like failures no matter how hard you work them. At Rosa's funeral, held on August 16th at Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church in Colton, over 200 people attended. Maria stood at the front with Isabela, the child wearing a black dress that Maria had bought for her. Miguel sat in the back alone, his head bowed. Some mourners glared at him. Others looked away. His presence felt like an accusation and a question all at once. Did he or didn't he? The whispers circulated through the church like a low hum beneath the prayers. After the funeral, Miguel tried to resume his life. He continued working security. He moved to a different apartment in Riverside, wanting distance from the memories, the suspicion, the weight of what had happened. He visited Isabela once a month, supervised visits arranged through child services, because he was technically still her father and had not been charged with any crime. During these visits, held in a sterile office with a social worker present, Isabela would sit and color or play with toys. She would acknowledge Miguel's presence with silence. He would try to talk to her, his voice soft, asking about school, about her Aunt Maria, about anything. She would not respond. After an hour, the social worker would end the visit, and Miguel would leave looking more defeated than when he'd arrived. Those who knew him during this period said he seemed like a man carrying something heavy. He was quieter than before. He stopped going out with friends. He gained weight, then lost it. He started smoking again after having quit the previous year. He would sometimes sit in his truck in parking lots before work, just sitting there in the dark, the engine off, staring at nothing. Detective Morrison checked in on the case every few months. She would call Maria to see if Isabela had said anything. She would drive by Miguel's new apartment, watching for something, anything that might crack the case open. She interviewed Rosa's coworkers again, her friends, anyone who might remember something new. She got nothing. In January 1998, 5 months after the murder, Carmen Hernandez, Rosa's mother, passed away from a heart attack. She was 61 years old. Maria would later say that her mother died of a broken heart, that losing Rosa had taken something vital from her, some will to continue. At Carmen's funeral, Miguel did not attend. Maria had made it clear he was not welcome. Time moved forward because time does that regardless of our wishes. Maria officially adopted Isabela in June 1998. The child was now 5 years old, enrolled in kindergarten, living in Maria's small house in Fontana. Isabela still had not spoken about that day. She had started speaking again in general, brief answers to questions, necessary communication, but never anything about her mother or that morning. When teachers asked about her family, she would say she lived with her aunt. She never mentioned her father. She never mentioned what she'd witnessed. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the terrible tension between loyalty and suspicion, Maria understood this feeling intimately. She believed Miguel had killed her sister. She had no proof, only the certainty that lived in her gut, the knowledge that comes from instinct rather than evidence. But she also saw a man who visited his daughter with genuine love in his eyes, who never once acted with violence or threat, who seemed as broken as she felt. How do you reconcile those contradictions? How do you hold both possibilities in your mind at once? Miguel's life continued in a kind of gray existence. He worked. He paid his bills. He visited Isabela monthly until the visits became too painful, and he asked to reduce them to every other month. The social workers noted that Isabela showed no fear of Miguel, but also no connection. She was polite and distant, treating him like a stranger who happened to share her space for an hour. In March 2000, Miguel met a woman named Jennifer at the warehouse where he worked. She was a dispatcher, friendly and kind. They began dating. He told her about Rosa early on, about the murder, about the investigation, about how he'd been suspected but never charged. "I didn't do it," he told her, looking directly into her eyes. "I loved her, I would never have hurt her." Jennifer believed him, or she wanted to believe him. They moved in together 6 months later. Years passed. 2001, 2002. The case file remained open but untouched. Detective Morrison retired in 2003, and the case was reassigned to a younger detective who reviewed it briefly and then set it aside to focus on active investigations. The file was beginning to gather dust. Isabela grew. She was 8 years old now, then 9, then 10. She did well in school. She had friends. She seemed to outside observers like a normal child who'd experienced trauma and moved beyond it. But Maria noticed things. The way Isabela would freeze when she heard a loud noise. The way she never wanted to watch violent television shows. The nightmares that came occasionally. Isabela waking up gasping, unable or unwilling to describe what she'd dreamed. In 2004, when Isabela was 11, she drew a picture in art class that made her teacher pause. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, saw a house with 2 figures inside. One figure was lying down. The other figure was standing with something in their hands. Dark red marks surrounded the lying figure. Mrs. Rodriguez asked Isabela about the picture. Isabela looked at it, then crumpled it up and threw it away. "It's nothing," she said. Mrs. Rodriguez retrieved the picture after class and called Maria. Maria looked at the drawing with her heart pounding. She asked Isabela about it that evening. Isabela shrugged. "I don't know what you mean, it was just a random picture." Her voice was flat, her face expressionless. Maria didn't push. She'd learned over the years that pushing Isabela on this topic led only to silence and withdrawal. Miguel and Jennifer got married in 2005 in a small ceremony at a courthouse in Riverside. They bought a house in Corona. Miguel had moved up to a supervisor position at the warehouse. He seemed to be building a new life, a normal life. He rarely spoke about Rosa anymore. When Jennifer asked about Isabela, he would say only that the relationship was complicated and he'd let it go for the child's sake. The visits with Isabela had stopped completely by 2006. Isabela was 13 and had the legal right to refuse visitation. She told the social workers she didn't want to see Miguel anymore. When asked why, she said, "I just don't want to." Miguel didn't fight it. He signed papers relinquishing his parental rights. Maria officially adopted Isabela as her daughter, erasing Miguel's legal connection to the child. Clears throat. The years accumulated like sediment. 2007. 2008. The murder of Rosa Hernandez was now 10 years old, then 11. The chances of solving it decreased with each passing month. Witnesses' memories faded. Evidence degraded. The world moved on, but Isabela had not moved on. The memory lived inside her like a seed buried in dark soil, waiting for the right conditions to finally break through the surface and reach toward light. In the spring of 2010, Isabela was 17 years old, a junior at Fontana High School. She was quiet and studious, planning to attend community college and study nursing. She still lived with Maria, who had never married, who had devoted her life to raising her sister's daughter. One evening in April, they were having dinner together, just the two of them at the kitchen table as they had thousands of times before. Maria mentioned that she'd seen Miguel at the grocery store earlier that week. He'd been with his wife, looking at produce, laughing about something. Isabela set down her fork. Her hand was shaking slightly. "He did it, you know," Isabela said quietly. Maria felt time stop. "What? He killed my mom. I saw him." The words hung in the air between them, 13 years in the making. Maria couldn't breathe. "Isabela, I've always known," Isabela continued, her voice steady now, stronger. "I was in my room when he came over that morning. I heard them arguing in the living room. She told him to leave. He wouldn't leave. She turned her back on him. She was walking toward the kitchen. I was watching from my doorway. He pulled out a gun. He shot her. She fell. He looked at me. I ran back into my room and hid under my bed. I heard him walking around. I heard him leave. I waited. Then I came out and she was there and I didn't know what to do, so I just sat on the couch and watched TV because that's what I always did." Maria was crying, reaching across the table for Isabela's hand. "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell someone?" Isabela's eyes were dry, her face composed. "I was 4 years old. I didn't understand what I'd seen. And then later, when I did understand, I was scared. And then even later, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a dream or something I made up. But it wasn't. It happened. He killed her and I watched." Maria called the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department the next morning. She asked to speak to someone about a cold case, about new information regarding the Rosa Hernandez murder. She was transferred twice before reaching Detective James Walsh, no relation to the deputy who'd been first on the scene 13 years earlier. Detective Walsh was 39, relatively new to the cold case unit, and he listened carefully as Maria explained what Isabela had told her. "Can I speak with her?" he asked. "Yes, she wants to talk." "She's ready." On April 23, 2010, Isabela Hernandez sat in an interview room at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Station. She was accompanied by Maria and by an attorney Maria had hired. Detective Walsh sat across from her with a tape recorder running and a notepad in front of him. A forensic psychologist, Dr. Lisa Chen, was also present to observe and ensure the interview was conducted appropriately given Isabela's history and age. Detective Walsh began gently. "Isabela, I understand you have information about what happened to your mother on August 12, 1997. Can you tell me what you remember?" Isabela nodded. She took a breath, and then she told him everything. Her words were clear and precise. She described her room, her toys, the door that was open a crack. She described hearing the argument, her mother's voice saying, "You need to leave, Miguel. I'm not doing this right now." His voice responding, "We need to talk about this. You're being unreasonable." The sound of footsteps, her mother moving toward the kitchen. Isabela peering around the doorframe because she was curious, because arguments between her parents weren't new and she wanted to see. "He had a gun in his hand," Isabela said. "It was small, black. He was holding it down by his leg. My mom didn't see it. She turned her back and was walking away from him. He raised the gun. He pointed it at the back of her head. He pulled the trigger. There was a loud bang. My mom fell forward onto the floor. She didn't move. He stood there looking at her. Then he looked up and saw me standing in my doorway. He looked at me for a long time. It felt like forever. His face was blank, like he didn't recognize me. Then he put the gun in his pocket and walked out the front door." "What did you do after he left?" Detective Walsh asked. "I ran back into my room and hid under my bed. I was so scared. I thought he might come back. I stayed under there for a while. I don't know how long. Then I came out and looked at my mom. She wasn't moving. There was blood all around her. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to call anyone. My mom's phone was on the counter and I couldn't reach it. So I just sat on the couch and turned on the TV and waited. I thought maybe my mom would wake up. I thought maybe someone would come." "Did anyone else come to the apartment that morning?" "No, just my Aunt Maria later. She screamed when she saw my mom. She grabbed me and we left." Detective Walsh made notes, his pen moving quickly across the page. "Isabela, why didn't you tell anyone this before?" "I was so little. At first I didn't really understand what I'd seen. Then later people asked me questions but I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't make the words come out. Then even more time passed and I started to think maybe I'd made it up, like maybe it was a bad dream I had that seemed real. But it wasn't a dream. I know it wasn't. I've always known." The interview lasted 2 hours. Dr. Chen would later note in her assessment that Isabela showed no signs of fabrication or false memory. Her account was consistent with the physical evidence from the scene. Her description of the gun matched the caliber of the bullet recovered. Her timeline matched what neighbors had heard. Most importantly, her emotional affect during the interview was consistent with someone recounting a genuine traumatic memory, not someone constructing a story. On May 3, 2010, 12 years and 9 months after Rosa Hernandez was murdered, Miguel Santos was arrested at his home in Corona. Detective Walsh and 4 other deputies arrived at 6 in the morning. Miguel answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair tousled from sleep. "Miguel Santos?" Detective Walsh asked. Miguel nodded. "You're under arrest for the murder of Rosa Hernandez." Miguel's face went pale. He didn't resist. He simply held out his wrists for the handcuffs and allowed himself to be led to a patrol car while his wife Jennifer stood in the doorway, crying and confused. Miguel was charged with first-degree murder. His bail was set at $2 million. He couldn't make it. He sat in county jail awaiting trial. His attorney, a public defender named Raymond Torres, visited him regularly. Miguel maintained his innocence. "I didn't do it," he told Torres. "I don't know why she's saying I did, but I didn't do it." "She's your daughter," Torres said. "Why would she lie?" "I don't know. Maybe she's confused. Maybe she's been convinced of something that didn't happen. But I didn't kill Rosa." The case drew significant media attention. A 13-year cold case solved by the victim's daughter finally speaking up. Television news ran segments about childhood trauma and repressed memories. Reporters interviewed neighbors who'd lived at the Riverside Gardens complex. Some remembered the case. Others had moved on and forgotten. Maria gave one interview, her face weary but determined. "My sister deserves justice," she told the camera. "Isabela deserves peace." The trial began in February 2011. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorney Karen Moss, a veteran prosecutor with a strong record in homicide cases. She laid out the case methodically. The history of domestic conflict between Miguel and Rosa. The separation. Miguel's admission that he'd been at the apartment that morning. the neighbor who'd seen his truck leaving at 11:15, the unexplained gap in his timeline, the gun he claimed to have sold but couldn't prove, and finally, Isabela's testimony. Isabela took the stand on the fourth day of trial. She was 18 now, an adult, though she looked younger sitting in the witness box. The courtroom was packed. Miguel sat at the defense table, his face expressionless. Isabela did not look at him. She looked at the prosecutor and answered questions in the same clear, steady voice she'd used in the detective's office. "Can you tell the jury what you saw on the morning of August 12, 1997? Moss asked. Isabela told them. Every detail. The argument, the gun, the shot, her mother falling, Miguel looking at her, the long hours after. The jury listened in absolute silence. Some jurors wiped their eyes. Miguel stared at the table in front of him. During cross-examination, Raymond Torres approached carefully. "Miss Hernandez, you were only 4 years old when this incident occurred, is that correct?" "Yes." "And you're now 18, correct?" "Yes." "That's 14 years. You're telling this jury that you remember specific details from when you were 4 years old." "I remember what happened." "But isn't it possible that your memory has been influenced by things people have told you over the years? By assumptions people made? No one told me what I saw it myself. You waited 13 years to tell anyone. Why?" "I was scared, and then I was confused, and then I was ready." Torres couldn't shake her testimony. Isabela remained consistent, calm, unwavering. The defense presented no witnesses. Miguel chose not to testify on his own behalf. Torres' closing argument focused on the passage of time, the lack of physical evidence connecting Miguel to the shooting, the potential unreliability of childhood memory. "The prosecution wants you to convict my client based on the recovered memory of a traumatized child," he told the jury. "Memory is not always truth. Trauma changes how we remember. 13 years is a long time." Karen Moss's closing argument was brief. Isabela Hernandez watched her father murder her mother. She was 4 years old. She couldn't process what she'd seen. She couldn't speak about it, but she never forgot. Some truths are too terrible to voice, but that doesn't make them less true. The defendant killed Rosa Hernandez. His daughter saw him do it. All the evidence supports her account. It's time for justice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on first-degree murder. Miguel showed no reaction. Jennifer Santos, in the back row, sobbed quietly. Maria held Isabela's hand. Isabela stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. Miguel was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. At sentencing, he was given the opportunity to speak. He stood, his hands shackled, and looked at the judge. "I didn't kill Rosa," he said. "I loved her. I would never have hurt her. I don't know why my daughter is saying what she's saying, but it's not true." The judge showed no reaction and delivered the sentence as mandated by law. Miguel is currently incarcerated at California State Prison in Lancaster. He has maintained his innocence through multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. Isabela graduated from community college with a degree in nursing. She works at a hospital in Ontario, California. She has not spoken publicly about the case since the trial. Maria still lives in Fontana. She keeps photographs of Rosa throughout her house. On the anniversary of Rosa's death each August, she and Isabela visit the grave, just the two of them, and they leave flowers. Clear's throat, the case of Rosa Hernandez, is a reminder that justice is not always swift, but sometimes it does arrive. It took 13 years for a terrified child to find the courage and clarity to speak the truth she'd been carrying. For those who have ever wondered if silence is the same as forgetting, Isabela Hernandez is the answer. She never forgot. The memory lived inside her, waiting for the moment when she was strong enough to finally give it voice. Rosa Hernandez was 23 years old when she died. Her daughter was 4. Justice came slowly, but it came.